Compass and Torch by Elizabeth Baines. Okay, I think the main thing that we notice about this one straight away is really the title, Compass and Torch. Obviously, key equipment when one is going camping or hiking or needing to negotiate around a difficult or unfamiliar place. So on a literal level, it's significant, but on a symbolic level, obviously, a compass is a device for finding one's direction, for assistance in going forward and understanding, whereas the torch, of course, is there to literally shine a light. We do use that phrase, of course, common vernacular, shining a light on something so we actually fully understand the problem. I think the fact that both the son and his father bought torches, there's plenty of light to show what is happening in their relationship. But at the same time, of course, there's no compass, which means there is no direction, ultimately no way forward. And at the same time, the conversation between these two people who are trying to bond and restart their relationship, rejuvenate the relationship, seems to focus purely on the compass and the torch and not on the actual meaningful personal things that you would expect a father and son to discuss. Okay, it's a very emotive story. At the back of it is really a family breakdown. The event of a young boy being taken on a camping trip with his father, the bitterness of his mother, obviously father seen as a very unreliable figure when he turns up, and the idea that the father seems rather desperate to be successful and to bond with his son and take him out on this kind of rites of passage trip together, and yet seems to have been absent for quite an extended period in his life, for 12 months prior to that. And it seems to be quite extreme, from one extreme to the other, and it also, there's no other attempts to go bonding, say by, going to the cinema, going bowling, possibly going out for a day somewhere. And at the same time, it causes some discomfort and conflict within the son himself, who feels torn between his mother and his father, and is clearly uncomfortable with what's going on with the trip. So the camping expedition basically gets underway. The boys picked up at the house, living with the mother and presumably the new stepfather, Jim, mother's boyfriend. He seems to be quite kind in many ways to both the boy and to his father. He seems quite awkward, very interested in what's happening, and feels a little bit sorry for the father, and quite sympathetic. I think he's uncomfortable with the bitterness of the mother. And from there they go camping, and basically the problems with the breakdown seem to be taken into the onto the camping trip as well. The boy brings his torch, which he feels that he's equipped for this trip, which the father brings too, but of course father's not brought the compass with him. And father seems quite an impulsive character that's not really thought things through, and this maybe is a reflective of his kind of impulsive nature and his carelessness in planning the trip, which could be very dangerous, of course, because they're not stopping on a campsite, which again will be something else to do. Obviously, if you're just going on a camping trip together for the first time, actually going on a moor where there's a group of wild ponies who become much more significant later on in the story. They do actually appear quite early on. One of them actually approaches the car and the father tries to bat it away. And then the father gets the tent out of the car boot and they start up the path that will take them to the brow of the hill. The father seems to be stepping ahead very quickly, and the son again he's kind of lagging behind, trying to catch up with him. And then the realisation comes that the father's forgotten his compass, so they don't have a way of finding the way. And the discussion seems to be purely about the compass and the torch rather than about the bonding experience that they should be sharing. There's nothing personal, and it becomes quickly obvious that they're sort of trapped with each other, and that there's no diversion from anyone else or from any other activities. It's purely father and son, which is a wonderful thing if they wish to share that bonding time. But of course, two people whose relationship is not working and don't have very much in common, clearly there are just going to be awkward silences and a very difficult and painful trip for both of them. They walk across the plain, set at the camp under the highest peak, they eat, and then when it goes dark they go to bed. During the night the tent becomes surrounded by wild ponies, and we're not told exactly what happens next, but we do know that it's going to haunt the boy for years to come, and seems somehow to be quite a significant sort of rites of passage incident that seems to signify something very important about his childhood for years to come. In his dreams he will see the wild fringed eyes of the horses and feel the deep thudding of their hooves. Okay, it's obviously very symbolic of some kind of force of nature, and we can imagine the fear he would feel in the night, the head to the ground, being surrounded by wild ponies in the middle of nowhere. Hardly an experience that's going to endear his father to him. Okay, quite a number of themes and issues in here. Obviously the symbolism of the compass and torch was said. the idea of light and, the light being cast upon a relationship which isn't working, and then the loss of direction, of course, represented by the compass. And the breakup of the family could indicate the loss of moral compass. The horses themselves are possibly quite sensitive animals, but it might be they represent natural feelings that someone had for his father, or it may possibly be more to do with the danger, the uncontrolled, unpredictable element which has entered their relationship through the family breakdown. Okay, the actual narrative structure itself is sort of quite non-linear, broken up, which maybe reflects, the broken family relations, and is an extension of the problems in the parents' marriage. The boy's only 8 years old, but it's a significant moment when he should be bonding with his father, but obviously it becomes a moment possibly when he realises things will never be the same again, and the relationship with his father is not going to work. Very traumatic time for the family. They've been separated for a year, and the boy's relationships with his mother, his father and Jim all seem to be difficult on different levels. The most important relationship, of course, in the story is that between father and son, and the boy seems to want to be like his father, trying to emulate him and to be loved by him, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of emotional common ground between them. The father doesn't really acknowledge or really acknowledge his son, or attempt to really ask any questions that would allow him to understand him or what's going on in his life, even on a sort of a very basic fundamental level of asking him what he's been doing at school, or anything to do with friends or his hobbies or interests. And there's just no discussion beyond just the pure thing about going camping, which in itself becomes, rather than a bonding activity, becomes so this horrendous experience from which neither of them is going to ever be the same again, in terms of the relationship breaking down even further afterwards. The father seems to be trying to do a traditional masculine male bonding, sharing activity he thinks his boy would enjoy, but the commitment seems lacking. It's almost he seems to want to just get it over with. The boy also seems to like the idea of being a man, but the mother basically mocks the plan together. The wildness of the moors dominates the story, the idea of nature as this unreckonable force. The ponies seem to belong on the moors, and the boy and his father seem very weak and insignificant out in the darkness. So it really does make him feel like small figures in a landscape being dwarfed by this massive, sort of natural backdrop that has a quite harsh, brutal, unforgiving nature to it, which possibly represents the landscape of the breakdown of their relationship, symbolically at least. Okay, there's the familiar setting of home at the beginning, going to the moors with a camping with his father. The countryside is very wild and empty, doesn't seem to be very much going on there, and obviously inhabited by wild ponies. And there, of course, as we know, there are many stories of people who do become lost and possibly killed due to exposure and various falls and various other problems they may encounter on the moors. And when the father's not properly equipped, it does really underline this idea of him being far too rash and impulsive, and possibly not very responsible, and maybe indicate some of the problems that have caused the breakdown in the marriage. The story does seem to be set in the present, but the last sentence shows that this is an incident recalled by the boys many years later, when he's grown up, very similar to Eveline's recollections in When the Wasp Drowned. Boy is never named. He's about 8 years old. We don't learn very much about his family. Could be any boy in that situation, so in that sense he's possibly an everyman character. Does admire his father, but wants to impress him and tries to imitate him, but at the same time is very excited and nervous about the trip. And obviously at the end of the trip, the hero worship will fall away, and the distance between them cannot be closed. Dad could be seen as a typical father, no longer lives with his son. He seems anxious to give him a good time, plan the adventure for him, but quite badly. Ex-wife obviously thinks that he's been very reckless, just showing off, and resents his coming to the house. He tries to appear quite cheerful for his son's sake at times, but this feels very, very strained, and you realise he's beginning to understand himself that the distance cannot be closed between them, that it's been too long and they've gone too far. It's interesting we don't ever learn exactly what happened to split them up, but it's quite clear that he's not happy, and there is quite a telling line much further on in the poem about when the father turns away from him when they're sleeping, that he has actually become quite expert in blocking out his own pain. So there is some sympathy for the father in the story. It's not entirely one-sided. Jim is actually the only character given a name. He's to be given a name rather. He's the mother's boyfriend. He's very kind and seems interested in the boy, even though he's not his dad. And he also seems to feel quite sorry and rather awkward about the way that that his girlfriend is treating her ex-husband. Obviously, as we said, the story is very much very, very symbolic. The idea of the compass and the torch reflecting the breakdown in the relationship and the lack of direction, and what is revealed by being on this trip, helping people to see things a certain way. the significance of the compass being left behind, is pretty evident, that this means that from the beginning it's a doom chip and there is no way of going forward. There's a lot of imagery used to describe nature to give it a sense of mystery and danger. There are rocks like carcasses, the ponies are ghost coloured, and there's a vivid description of the landscape, but the conversations are quite dull. They're in colloquial language, and the boy chatters on, asks questions, and these attempts to get into conversation with his father are met with quite monosyllabic answers that actually are closed answers that don't allow the question to go anywhere, which seems to obviously fit in with the idea of the idea of the compass, that there is no direction here, there is no way of going forward. Mother seems to express herself with quite a lot of anger, and a lot of exclamation marks and question marks to indicate that after her speech. The story is written in the third person. Sometimes the characters and settings are described as if they've been seen from a distance here, which again may possibly to emphasise that idea of the figures in the landscape and the sort of loneliness of the characters, that they struggle to get themselves through this campaignship and establish some kind of relationship. And the narrator seems to take us into the boy's thoughts quite a lot, so we do see lots of things from his point of view. So there is an internal dialogue with the boy, and towards the end we get glimpses of the father's thoughts and feelings, as I've just said, but they're quite limited. The story is divided into short sections by asterisks and separate at different stages in the journey. It is very much like it could be a scene, or a series of scenes from a film. It does seem to have quite a visual element to it. Most of the story is presented in the present tense, although there are 3 short sections in the past tense, as the boy remembers what happened before he set off in the car with his father. And strangely, the final sentence uses the future tense, that the writer is actually predicting what's going to happen in the future, but obviously that's a point now looking back into the past, and when the failure of this camping trip symbolises the ultimate failure of their relationship.